Nuclear technology revolutionized the world, taking human society to new, uncharted possibilities. In the modern world, technology is always changing and expanding, attempting to aid human society to reach their full potential. Nuclear power is a big step in this direction for humanity, as it now becomes an essential tool for industries such as food and agriculture, industrial manufacturing, medical and scientific research, transportation, and water distribution, all of which are powered through the electricity produced from nuclear power. This is generated through fission, which is the process of splitting up uranium atoms to yield energy. The heat released by fission is then used to create steam that then spins a turbine to generate electricity, without the harmful byproducts emitted by fossil fuels. While nuclear power is extremely beneficial in the modern world, it also has the potential to go wrong, like in the cases of Fukushima and Chernobyl.
These world-changing nuclear meltdowns were two types of disasters that humankind had yet to experience in history, and it was soon realized the great extent of power and potential destruction that nuclear energy has.
It's now clear that the Soviet Union has suffered one of the worst disasters in the history of nuclear power.
От Совета министров СССР. На Чернобыльской атомной электростанции произошла авария.
On April 26, 1986, there was a mechanical error within Reactor 4 of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, causing the reactor to explode. The Chernobyl power plant, located in northern Ukraine, sent millions of radioactive particles into the air, spreading them throughout the surrounding environment. The explosion was caused by a failure in the cooling system of the reactor when the operators tried to carry out a routine test, causing an unexpected power surge. The emergency shutdown button was pushed, but the cooling rods malfunctioned as they entered the core. A second explosion quickly followed, blowing the 1,000-ton roof off, sending deadly radiation everywhere. The international community was not made aware of the disaster until days later, when radioactive particles were detected in Sweden, suggesting that the whole of Europe was at risk to the dangerous radiation. Investigators speculated that the system failure was ultimately due to the Soviets and their conservative tendencies when it came to manufacturing infrastructure. Corners were cut and cheap materials were used, resulting in one of the worst nuclear catastrophes in history. To contain the reactor and radiation for the foreseeable future, a giant metal sarcophagus was built to cover the site.
On March 11, 2011, Japan experiences a devastating earthquake, resulting in a massive tsunami that approaches the island with haste. The forces of these waters cut off the electricity supply to the Fukushima power plant, causing the cooling system of the plant to fail. With no cooling systems in place, the reactors are left to overheat and therefore melt the nuclear fuel. This causes explosions, which send radioactive materials into the surrounding sea and atmosphere. The IAEA, International Atomic Energy Agency, is called into action to help figure out how to recover and fix this tragedy quickly. Over the course of the following 5 years, the agency sends many teams to Fukushima with the goal of learning lessons from the accident to improve global nuclear safety precautions. In addition to learning, the teams also try to stabilize the reactors and decommission the plant, although this process is expected to take decades to complete. The Chernobyl and Fukushima disasters were classified at level 7 on the International Nuclear and Radiological Event Scale, making them the worst nuclear meltdowns in history to date.
Data from the Soviet Union list only 31 deaths caused by the meltdown. However, modern research ranges between 9,000 and 200,000 people. The area surrounding the Chernobyl power plant is known as the Chernobyl exclusion zone, in which common citizens are prohibited from entering without a legitimate reason. Many people chose to stay behind, however, and there are nearly 100 Ukrainians that live within the exclusion zone today. Radiation levels vary, and there are many places near Chernobyl with the same amount of radiation that would be present in the center of a major city like Shanghai or London. However, many areas within the exclusion zone have extremely high levels of radiation and should be avoided. If exposed to high levels of radiation, people are likely to experience skin burns and acute radiation syndrome, also known as radiation sickness. And according to the United States EPA, it can also result in long-term health effects such as cancer and cardiovascular disease. Radiation exposure also increases the possibility of cancer. Radiation particles from the Chernobyl explosion were absorbed by plants in the area, and the groundwater was contaminated. All wildlife in the exclusion zone had to be exterminated as they could easily spread radiation. Additionally, any animal products like beef, cheese, or milk could no longer be consumed. After the explosion, the wind blew the radioactive particles to the west, coating the nearby forest, causing the trees to die. This area is known as the Red Forest, as the color is extremely different to the forest on the adjacent side of the road. Because of the radiation in the soil and groundwater, water pipes in Chernobyl must run above ground to avoid contamination.
According to the Green Cross International Association, over 32 million people were affected by the radioactive fallout from the nuclear disaster in Fukushima. This ranges from relocation due to exposure levels to actual injuries from the radiation. In addition to many lifestyles, the environment was also greatly affected by the radionuclides. Many foodstuffs were contaminated through either consumption of radionuclides directly on the food source, or that was absorbed through the roots of the agriculture. When monitoring happened shortly after the accident, approximately 1% of samples exceeded the maximum values. Today, almost no foodstuffs in Japan continue to show radioactive contamination. Apart from Japan, the outside world was not as greatly affected by the disaster. 80% of the radioactive material was distributed into the atmosphere in the direction of the Pacific Ocean. This material was primarily dispersed in the northern hemisphere, where it became diluted. Both of these disasters were devastating. There is not really a specific solution to eliminate such tragedies. Nuclear power itself is an amazing tool that requires specific care in order to function smoothly. The best preventative measure that humanity can take is to check and test all parts of the nuclear power plants and to prepare for as many situations as possible. The cause of the problem with both Fukushima and Chernobyl were both preventable situations. Had Fukushima built higher dam walls, it is probable that there would have been no damage done to the plant, therefore preventing the disaster entirely. Also, when one really examines it, the disaster at Chernobyl was a man-made human error. Had the staff been better trained, with more testing being done on the site, many people argue that the mechanical error would have been caught and prevented way in advance. This begs the question:
is humankind taking the responsibility of nuclear power seriously enough?